Hello and welcome back to episode 2 of Bowyer's Black Book. Today we'll be having a look at the midfield options for Birmingham, and I'm pleased to say that I'm joined once again by Luke from Blues Analytics. Luke, how are you?
All good, thanks mate, all good. Made a bit better by the fact that England have just got through to the knockouts of the Euros, so that's made obviously everything a little bit better, but yeah, all good this end mate. How about yourself?
Yeah, not too bad at all, thanks. Fairly busy week. Moving house and various other bits, so apologies this episode is reaching you a little bit later than we would have wanted, but unfortunately these things happen sometimes, and as you say, yeah, good to see that England have progressed and to face the Germans in the next round. So we'll kick off, and in very similar fashion to the first episode, we'll be running through the squad options that Lee Bowyer has available to him in midfield, and then we'll be suggesting some areas on the pitch within that midfield that potentially might need some strengthening, where we're possibly lacking, and we'll do that in exactly the same format as we did in episode 1, where we'll both pick a sensible option. So that potentially is a player from a lower league or somebody who is on a free transfer or is in low wages. We'll then both pick a preferred option. So this is somebody potentially that Blues may have to shell out some cash for. Trying to keep it still probably within realistic budgets that we think Blues could potentially spend or have spent in previous transfer windows. And then finally, we've got a former Lee Bowyer option, which, as we discussed last time, will be a potentially a former Charlton player. So here we go, looking at the midfield then, and we've split it down once again into all of the players that are currently contracted to the club on professional terms as of, what are we today, 23rd of June, although those eagle-eyed viewers out there will spot that we are missing the latest addition to the Birmingham City squad that signed today. So Ryan Woods is not there. Luke, what are your thoughts on the transfer of Woods today?
I'm a big fan of Ryan Woods. I've liked him for quite a while. My first impressions of Ryan Woods was when he came to St Andrews with Brentford. I believe it was in the same team as Romain Sawyers, and I believe it was the two of them in midfield. And I don't think we got near either of them all night. We were just chasing shadows, and that sort of left a bit of an impression on me, to be honest. And from then, I sort of thought to myself that at the time Brentford weren't. I don't think they were the sort of playoff chasing team that they were this season. So I remember thinking that Woods would potentially make the step up at some point, maybe to one of those teams that were expected to get promotion. I vaguely remember Villa talking about either signing him or Dean Smith, quite vocal on praising him. And I believe that Swansea were looking at him quite intently as well. I can't remember whether it was when they were in the Premier League or whether when they were dropped down to Championship, but I'm sure they were looking at him at one point. And then Stoke eventually signed him for quite a hefty fee. I believe that Rabbit thought that he could be the man that they could completely build around. That sort of deep-lying playmaker who can get everything ticking, getting everybody around him and sort of setting the tempo to games. He didn't really work for him at Stoke. He outsaw a couple of managers. I know that Nathan Jones came in and Michael O'Neill, eventually he's there now. But Rabbit obviously fancied him so much that he took him to Millwall. You and me, we had a brief chat prior to recording about his pathway and how it's gone to Stoke and then eventually come to us. It doesn't necessarily mean that he's not good enough to play for Stoke or that Stoke may have loftier ambitions than us next season and that he shouldn't be part of that. It's, sometimes it's just horses for courses, and some players find themselves coming to different clubs in an attempt to ignite their career. Being a West Midlands lad, I vaguely remember when he was at Brentford that there was talks that he wanted to be eventually closer to his home in Cannock, which I believe was one of the catalysts of the transfer rumours with Aston Villa. But I'm sure that being close to home would have potentially been a consideration. I find it hard to believe that only Blues would have been in for him. I imagine Rowett would have liked to have taken him to Millwall. I was briefly reading a piece that Brian Dick released with, I believe it was the writer made from the Stoke Sentinel, who was talking about the fact that Rowett would have possibly liked to, if the wages could have been something that he could have worked with, then they would have liked to take him to Millwall. But I don't know whether that was the sticking point. But I wouldn't have been surprised if there were other clubs after him. He has got that quality. Anyone who's watched him at a championship level knows that he has got that quality and that he has got that ability to pick a pass. I think there was some criticism from some sections of the Millwall fans that said that he didn't get stuck in enough. But I don't think he's ever really going to be that sort of midfielder. Really, I don't think he's going to be flying into challenges, and I don't think he's going to be that sort of calibre of midfielder. The one slight concern for me, again in that piece that Brian Dick shared from somebody who has been watching him at Stoke, was a suggestion that he does need quality players around him in order to get the best out of him. Again, we haven't seen Bowyer's full transfer plans unravel yet, so it's been interesting to see the ilk of player that we do put around him. But I don't think he's the sort of player that's going to noticeably transform Blues into a slick passing unit. I think that he's going to need a lot of help in that respect. But as far as sort of first pieces to a jigsaw go, he's certainly not a bad one, and I am certainly a big fan of his.
Yeah, it certainly seems like he's a Gary Rowett favourite. I mean, I certainly remember him being linked to us previously when Rowett was in charge. As you say, he was the man that took him to Stoke for fairly big money, really, for a championship midfielder. And then obviously again, once he departed for Millwall, he's spent the last 18 months in London with them. So yeah, definitely a Gary Rowett favourite. And I think you're right. I think he will certainly add a level of quality on the ball that we're currently missing in the midfield for all the qualities that Gary Gardner and Ivan Sunjic possess, in terms of the energy that they bring and the almost dog with a bone like attitude they have in that midfield, just hassling and harrying. I think Woods will really complement that in terms of just bringing a bit of calmness and a bit of quality on the ball. And I guess as we talk through the rest of his midfield, we might kind of see where he might fit into the midfield, I guess. And again, a lot of that will come down to what Lee Bowyer potentially might line up with for next season. Obviously, we've seen a flat 4-4-2 and more a 5 at the back and 3 in midfield. And then we've also seen kind of just glimpses of that diamond that he played at Charlton. So, and I think Woods could fit into all 3 of those systems quite nicely in various different ways. So, just starting with the 2 current defensive midfielders that are contracted to the club. One of them being a new signing from last summer in Adam Clayton, and the second one being Blues youngster who's just signed a new contract in Ryan Stirk, who had a little bit of game time in the final 2 games, I think it was last season, and actually impressed really in 2 really poor performances that Blues had. He was certainly a standout as a 20-year-old. He's a Welsh youth international. Do we think potentially he could make the step up into the first team this season?
I mean, when I watched him last season, he sort of seamlessly stepped in. I know that sort of some young players, when they come in, they sometimes show a bit of nervousness, which is understandable, really, when they've stepped up from youth football to play at the senior level. But when I watched Ryan Stirk, I thought that he looked like he just sort of slotted in seamlessly. He has, obviously, as you say, he's got that pedigree. He's played for the Wales youngsters. So it's no surprise, really, that he has taken it to like a fish to the water, really. And I always remember reading a brilliant interview. I believe it was with his mum, potentially. And she was saying that whenever she goes into his room, it's completely spotless. And it's almost like an OCD sort of cleanliness that almost reflects the way that he plays football, and it reflects the way that he likes to clean up and just sit in front of that back four and just sort of tidy up and keep everything neat, tidy. Once he gets the ball, he'll then sort of just pop it off to somebody else that's next to him. Doesn't like to overcomplicate it, just keep everything very neat and tidy. And I think that there was seemed to be some deliberation with the news that he'd signed a contract. It could have been something just as simple as the fact that he may have been on holiday and he may have just been having a bit of downtime before coming back and giving Blues a decision. But I'm sure it is a contract that will keep him here long enough to hopefully flourish and step up into the first team. Is that this season? It remains to be seen, really. I mean, we've got, as you say, we've got Clayton there. I can't see Clayton getting much game time. Obviously, Woods, as you say, will come into the fold. Will we sign another out-and-out defensive midfielder? I'd imagine so. Especially if Clayton doesn't play football, then he's left quite light, because you wouldn't really trust or put Sunic, as we spoke about earlier, you wouldn't really put Sunic as that sole defensive midfielder role just in front of the back four. So if we're saying that we've got Clayton, Woods and then Sturck, it'll be interesting to see whether another does come in. Does Sturck get loaned out to give him game time? Or does he get kept around the fringe of the first team playing the Cups games? It'll be interesting to see, really. But I think he can handle the step up, definitely.
Yeah, no, I was impressed with the kind of two performances he had at the end of last season. And personally, I'd like to see him around the first team this year. He signed a 1-year deal. So to me, I don't think it would really make much sense to loan him out for the season. And unless, we really don't think that he's going to play any sort of part, and actually getting some game time would be the best thing for him. But I just think, having signed a 1-year deal, you imagine that he will be part of that first team group. And if he potentially gets sort of 10, 15 appearances of varying different levels and in different competitions, etc., I think that would be really great for his development. And then you obviously just touched on Adam Clayton there, who has a year left of his 2-year deal that he signed at the start of last summer to run. He didn't feature, I don't think he even made the squad, did he, in any of Lee Bowyer's games in charge last season. So difficult to see him playing any sort of part, really. The sticking point, I think, with him will be is can Blues get him out of the club if it's a case of he's seemingly not wanted by Bowyer, because I think that sometimes can be a difficulty. He's obviously been a championship stalwart now for a number of seasons. He's probably on a half-decent wage. He's not had the greatest of seasons, I don't think you'd say, with us. So it's whether or not somebody in League One who's got a bit of money takes a punt, or does somebody at the bottom end of the Championship see something in him potentially, and is there room to do a deal where actually we in similar fashion to the way that we paid up Davis's, the rest of David Davis's contract, do we do something there just to get him off the books? And then, as you say, possibly Ryan Woods comes in and slots into that deepest midfield position, but then potentially do you still want another out-and-out defensive midfielder? And you kind of touched on it there, and if we move forward a little bit into those central midfield roles, where we've got Gary Gardner, Ivan Sunic, Riley McGree back on loan until January of 2022, Charlie Lakin signing a new deal there. We've also got Caelan Boyd-Muntz, who signed a new deal also, along with Ryan Sturck. And then you've got a couple of the youngsters in, Tate Campbell, who's been out on loan, and Kane Thompson-Summers there. So, touched on it a minute ago where you said actually that Ivan Sunic potentially doesn't have the defensive discipline to play as that kind of holding midfield, and I think to a degree I'd agree with you there. I know it's a role that he played at Zagreb before, and he's played for the Croatian under-21s, but I think from what I've seen in a blue shirt so far, I think by doing that you either curb the energy and the running that he gives you, or his defensive discipline probably goes awry, because I think, as you've said before, he's kind of a bit of a dog after a bone, that he will run and run and run and he'll chase after it, and actually playing that role could be quite easy to play around. So just having a look at some of the other options that we've got there, Gary Gardner I think has been a fantastic pickup from a couple of years ago in that midfield, a true box-to-box midfielder, drives the team forward at times with those runs from deep in midfield and pushes us forward. Again, in possession of the ball, probably lacking a little bit of quality, but does get up and down the pitch and does do the defensive side really well as well. We've got Riley McGree coming back, which I think probably took some people by surprise, actually, certainly myself. I thought he'd done fairly well last year on loan, and obviously with his parent club Charlotte not starting until 2022, it kind of made sense for him to come back to a club that he knows and to familiar surroundings. So I think it'd be nice to see him back, because I think, again, he adds something a little bit different to that midfield, left-footed. Again, just a little bit of quality and a bit of drive forward. Charlie Lakin's had a really excellent season up in Scotland with Ross County, so it'd be interesting to see how he goes coming back into the fold. And I know there was big things expected of Caelan Boyd months before his injury last year, so hopefully we get to see a little bit more of him. But what are your kind of thoughts on that central midfield group then?
But in relation to the central midfield area, I think that a lot of it comes back to how Bowyer wants to play next year. And I don't think he's going to necessarily nail the colours to the mast and say, right, this is how I'm going to play this year. Because as we saw last season, there was a lot of changing on the fly, changing after 20 minutes in one game. There was some changes at half-time. So I don't think there's going to be a standalone formation that Bowyer's going to use, really, which makes it difficult to see which midfielders may play where next season, who may be surplus to requirements, and how each midfielder will fit in. I mean, first things first, in relation to McGree, I think his versatility last season was one of the main things that stood out to me. I think he started, if I remember correctly, he started being labelled as a number 10 that's going to sort of play behind a striker or a couple of strikers. So it's sort of seen that in the cranker 4-2-3-1 that he was famed for playing, that McGree would be playing just behind Djukovic or Hogan as a lone striker. But then I remember one game away last season, it might have been the Preston game when he scored. I believe, off the top of my head again, I think we played 5 at the back of that game, and I'm fairly confident McGree made up 3 of the sort of midfield bank. But he did have that licence to get forward a little bit, hence why he got onto one of a couple of Duke's flick-ons, and he did get his goal quite early in the game. And then flash forward to Bowyer and how he used him. He seemed to like him in that engine room. But he also played him, of course, as the left wing back when we played Brentford, which is probably a testament again to McGree's versatility, but also the qualities that he's got. Really, he has got that quality on the ball. He's got a great left foot from what I've seen, but he can sort of dribble, pick a pass. He does like a tackle. So I think he's a little bit of a jack of all trades, really. At first, I thought that he may have been coming back just out of convenience, really, because he needs to be somewhere prior to going to Charlotte. But after seeing how Bowyer used him and the fact that I'm assuming that he trusts him, it may have been a case of Bowyer going to the board and saying, I want the lad back next season, because I think that he can give us cover in a few positions. And then he's obviously gone on to play for the Australian national team recently, and he was getting sort of some rave reviews. I think he got a couple of assists in one of the games. I can't remember if they were both from set pieces or there was at least one from a set piece, which I think the Blues, again, have been lacking that to an extent. Ivan Sanchez, as we know, can whip in a mean corner from the right-hand side. But we do generally need to improve our set pieces, especially when we have got Duke up top. So I think McGree is a decent pickup. And at 22 years old, again, he can only improve under Bowyer, a man who tends to pride himself over improving young players, particularly midfielders, taking them on and teaching them what he used to do as a player and how he would look to improve them. So it'll be interesting to see how particularly a couple of those younger midfielders get on under Bowyer's tutelage next season. Gary Gardner, we've seen 2 different sides of Gary Gardner, really. We've seen the side that he can deliver man of the match performance a couple of games in a row. He can be that sort of all singing, all dancing midfielder that sort of just seems to burst around the pitch, full of energy. But then when he gets the ball, he can pick a pass and he likes to get a foot in. And he does have those games where he just seems to be absolutely everywhere, like a Gerard Light. But then the next game, you'll see it and he'll just sort of go under the radar and not really do much. So, but I mean, you don't really expect Gary Gardner to be excelling in any of those areas really. For me, at 28, I can't imagine that Gary Gardner's going to get much better. I think we've probably seen the best of what he has to offer, and when he does offer his best, there was a few people putting him in the ring to get a Player of the Season last season. So by no means, he's effective at what he does, and he can bring something to the team. But one of the things that stands out for me, I was looking at over our midfield earlier, but out of Ivan Sunic, Gary Gardner, Riley McGree, Mikel San Jose, Adam Clayton, Raheem Harper and Ryan Stirk. So there's 7 midfielders for you. Apparently they got 1 assist between all of them last season, which, for a midfield unit to only give you 1 assist, of course that isn't including Bella and Sanchez, who are in the midfield for the definition of this graphic, but 7 sort of central / defensive midfielders there, and they've provided 1 assist, and I think they've provided 3 goals between them all as well. And again, I think that if Bowyer wants to look to use that narrow diamond next season, I guess you have to ask yourself: is it going to improve our goal output? Is it going to assist more goals? And I think if you've got a collection of midfielders who aren't currently assisting many goals, do you then play 3 of them in a diamond sort of shape, or do you find a formation that fits in Bella and Sanchez, who between them I think gave us 13 assists? So again, it'll be interesting to see what Bowyer does with that midfield next season. Sunic, you get the feeling that with the length of his contract still to go, and the price we paid for him, it feels like, not that he's got a God-given right to play, but you'd like to think that any manager at Blues, there may be a slight bit of pressure from above to get the best out of somebody who the board have invested a fair bit of money in. So it'll be up to Bowyer to see how he wants to use Sunic and how he feels he can get the best out of him. I certainly don't think Karanka got the best out of him. There was a couple of games when I tried to work out what he was doing and where his position was, and I couldn't really get my head around it. So it'll be up to Bowyer to work out how he fits into that midfield. If Bowyer was given a blank canvas to build a midfield, would he have Sunic in there? Who knows? Is it something that he may feel that he's forced to do? I imagine that there will be potentially a couple of players there that Bowyer feels that he needs to play. I mean, what do you think about the wide men? I know with a lot of the talk has been around, will he play a formation with wing backs? Or will it be that narrow diamond? But for me, I think that Bowyer's spoken about getting the best out of what we've got and using the weapons that we have. But for me, it still seems that Bella and Sanchez need to play, really.
Yeah, it's that's a really interesting question, isn't it? Because I think when we were putting this together and discussing areas that needed strengthening and what we thought might happen for next year, I think we probably based a lot of our thinking on Bowyer potentially playing like a 5-3-2 or the narrow diamond more so than maybe a traditional 4-4-2, and I think that will probably come across when we discuss in a minute the areas that we've chosen to strengthen in this midfield. And I think part of that was kind of down to the way that he played last year. Obviously, we did line up in a 4-4-2 with Bella and Sanchez a couple of times, but then Bella seemed to drop out of favour completely. And when Sanchez was used, he was used in a more narrow role. I think, just looking at the options that we've got there currently, you've got Bella on one side, Sanchez on the other. Fran Villalba to come back into the fold on paper. So the Almeria team that he was playing in didn't get promoted into La Liga, which meant that the obligatory purchase option on him wasn't triggered. Whether or not he actually comes back and plays for Blues, I think is an entirely different question itself, and you could probably do an entire podcast on just that. So we won't delve into it too much. My personal view is that I don't think that he will be around next season. So that then kind of just leaves you with the two wide options or senior wide options in Bella and Sanchez. And I think the one thing that Sanchez has in his favour is that he does have a little bit of versatility. He can play more centrally, either in a midfield three, possibly, although I don't think that he's best suited there, or a little bit further forward in the number 10 role. So I think in terms of Bowyer being flexible and adaptable, Sanchez certainly fits into that. I think Bella less so. I can't see him slotting into a wing-back role. He has played whilst he was in Spain as a kind of second striker and actually scored a few goals. So whether or not Bowyer's tempted to use him like that, I don't know. But then you wonder if we maybe would have seen that at the back end of last season, if that was something that was in his thinking. So, I mean, I guess the only curious thing is that we've obviously been very heavily linked over the last week or so with Gillingham winger Jordan Graham, which then might suggest that potentially we are strengthening those wide areas. But I think you alluded to at the top, mate, that actually I think Bowyer will be fairly flexible and adaptable with the styles and the systems that he plays next season. So, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me that he'd want a couple of options that could play out wide. But I also, just looking at the midfield options that we've got, the central ones, in terms of you're probably looking at sort of 5 or 6 guys there who, if we do play a two-man midfield, are vying for 2 spots there, which again makes me think that potentially he might be looking at something with a 3-man midfield or more.
Yeah, and as you said, Sanchez has fitted in. I believe he played it was either the tip of the diamond against Derby away last season, or it was on the right of a central midfield slot, and then he was sort of drifting out to the wide, and he was sort of pinging balls in for Duke. So as you say, he can more or less fit into that system, and so can Bella. But then again, as you quite rightly say, with the links to another winger in Graham who can play on both sides, maybe it's Bowyer sees that he does want another option out there. But the impression that I got from listening to a couple of interviews with Jordan Graham, that I very much get the impression that he sees this next move for him as vital. He's had some horrible injuries in the past, and now he's playing his best football. And he very much talks about the fact that he wants to show people what he can do and show people the quality that he's got. And he's finally realised that, he needs to be playing regularly and work for the team and do everything that he needs to do to help the team. And when he was discussing his next move, and I just got that vibe from him when listening to him talk, that I don't think he would go to a club to sit on the bench. Again, that's going to be up to him if he does come to Birmingham to force his way into those plans. But I very much got the impression that, when you talk about him and what he brings to the team, how much he dribbles every game, and those successful dribbles, and the balls he gets in with the accuracy that it does, and the fact that he broke double digits for assists this season, crossing similarly to a big target man. I don't know. I just potentially get the impression that if we do move for Graham, it won't be so that he can come and sit on the bench. It will be that he comes and starts. But again, as we've both said, that everything that we've seen has been gearing up towards potentially loading that midfield out with younger, more agile midfielders, similar to how he built at Charlton. And when he put his team together, he wanted some of those younger, more agile players who could pass through the lines and who could put balls in behind 2 forwards. But I just get the impression that when Bowyer looks at our options and how he wants to play, I do feel that he still thinks that Duke is definitely our biggest goal threat. And I think that if you play Duke in a narrow 4-4-2 diamond, if you have got that narrow setup, then where does Duke get the service from? Which would be my sort of key worry, really. And I think that when Duke didn't play on the back end of last season. I believe it was the Blackburn Rovers game, I believe it was.
Yeah.
Where he didn't play, and when we brought him on, said and did put that picture of a crossing for him to score from. And I know we're not talking about thoroughly about the attacking options right now, but for me, I think that unless we're going to sign a lot to go with Woods, unless we're going to sign a really, really quality midfielder who's got guaranteed goals and assists at this level, I think we may struggle to create anything for those forwards. So it will be definitely interesting to see which way Bowyer goes with it. And again, I'm not expecting him to particularly, show his hand early doors and say this is how I'm going to play, because I imagine that he will have 2 or 3 setups in mind. But it's certainly interesting seeing the personnel that we're linked to and the players that we're bringing in, and what Bowyer talks about, how he wants from his teams. So it's certainly interesting to see how it develops over the next few weeks.
Yeah, so I think in summary, essentially, our main goal threat at the moment looks to come from balls in from out wide and into Juki. And if we're going to do that, then really you're looking at the wide players contributing those assists. If we do go for a slightly narrower formation or with 5 at the back, that pressure then is put on either the wing backs to provide that delivery from out wide, or you're then looking at trying to add goals and creativity into our midfield, which we currently don't have. So I think those are probably the ways forward in terms of adding to the midfield options. So with that in mind, we're looking at bringing another centre midfielder, probably somebody around the sort of age of 26 or below, just to complement the guys that were already in there. And as we spoke about at the top when we were running through the current midfield options, we probably want somebody that's going to offer a bit more of a goal threat in there. It's an area where Blues, over the last, probably 5-6 years have struggled for goals from midfield, and certainly from central midfield areas. So yeah, somebody that can bring a goal threat would be really, really handy in there. And just to go along with other characteristics that Lee Bowyer looks for in any kind of player who plays in his teams, they've got to have lots of energy, get around the pitch really well. So somebody who's probably going to offer another box-to-box type player, but is probably slightly more attack-minded than, say, a Gary Gardner. So, opening Bowyer's Black Book up once again, and the first pick that we've got, as is customary now, is a former Charlton player, and the one that we've gone for this time is 21-year-old centre midfielder Albie Morgan. So, Luke, do you want to talk us through this one?
Yeah, absolutely. He's a young midfielder that I really like the look of. Of course, as you've alluded to, that he played for Charlton under Lee Bowyer. Still at Charlton now, playing for Nigel Adkins, who took over the reins from Lee Bowyer. And of course, the first thing that stands out there is the age profile there. 21 years old, so he may not be immediately ready to step into a championship team, although he certainly has the quality to. A bit more of a slight frame than some of the other lads we've got. He's 5'11". Similarly to how I discussed around some of the other defensive midfield options such as Joe Bell. He's not the sort of player that does get stuck in, but he definitely brings a bit more guile and craft with the ball when going forward. He joined Charlton when he was, I think he joined at under 9s level into that famous Charlton Academy, and I believe he's already played for Charlton around 57 times, which has led to him picking up the Young Player of the Season award this season. You look at him playing, he's sort of almost in the Barry Bannon mould really, not quite as small and slight as that, but he's in there and he wants the ball. He wants to be playing passes. He wants to be progressing his team up the pitch. He doesn't do very many sort of sideways and backwards passes. He very much wants to progress his team forward. He has been utilised, I believe, in about 7 or 8 different positions at Charlton. Sometimes only sort of brief cameos on both wings, right and left midfield. But he predominantly wants to be the central midfielder in there. He has played in that Bowyer narrow diamond with the 4 midfielders, including the 10. But he's also played in a 4-3-3. He's played as the central midfielder in there, and he has played out wide in there. And he's also played as the left central midfielder in a 4-4-2 as well. So he has been trusted in there to look after the ball and get his team forward. There was a bit of a saga with him previously at Charlton when Lee Bowyer came out to the media and he directly criticised Morgan. He said that he wasn't quite doing enough on the defensive side, and that he had directly been involved in causing a couple Charlton to concede a couple of goals, which I don't think that the Charlton fans took too kindly to. But since Nigel Adkins has come in recently, he actually came out and said that he echoed Lee Bowyer's judgment of the player and said that he's got unreal technical ability. And Bowyer himself said that he believed that he was possibly one of the best midfielder that Charlton had at the time, which is quite something considering his age. But he did need to improve on that defensive side. So there may be sort of questions going forward around Bowyer and how he wants to improve him, or how he would want him to improve in order to step into another one of his teams. But even that, Albin Morgan, he reacted quite well. He came out and said that he had lost 10 kilograms in the first lockdown because he wanted to prove a point to Bowyer, and he wanted to prove that his words had inspired him and he could do better. And he said that those words did spur him on. But that constructive criticism from Bowyer, it's never stopped him from outright picking him from the team. He played in both the semi-finals when Charlton did come up to the Championship. He's even kept his boots to one side as a memento and said that he didn't want to wear them after that because being involved in both of those semi-finals was such a special occasion for him that he was thankful. So even at that young age, really, he's had that big game experience. And of course, Bowyer may look at him and think that from his time at Charlton that he didn't do enough on the defensive side. But I think if you've got the right, midfielder behind him or the right midfielder next to him, of course, Bowyer wants all of his midfielders to help out for the team. But sometimes, young players, he's got a lot to learn, really. His best years are still way ahead of him. So it isn't too conclusive in to say that he's never going to help out on the defensive side. But he's already sort of reacted quite well to Bowyer's comments in the past. So there's absolutely no reason to suggest that Bowyer may not want to work with him again. Not least due to his absolute unreal technical ability, in Bowyer's words. And of course, he has got the quality there to work with. And Bowyer has said a couple of times now in interviews that he prides himself on improving players, particularly the midfielders, how they get forward, how they pick those runs. Of course, anyone who watched Bowyer as a player, he was a little bit before my time in his prime. But anyone who talks about Lee Bowyer talks about the late runs into the box. He did it at Birmingham City in the latter stage of his career. He had quite a fruitful goal-scoring season for us. So, of course, he has still got all of that knowledge to impart onto these young midfielders. So, he may be a player that Bowyer still looks at and says that he wants to work with. And you look at the metrics there, the key passes, the expected assists, the shot assists. He's picking out the right passes, and he's passing the ball to players who are then obviously getting shots off or getting them in positions where they might want to have a chance at scoring a goal. But even the accuracy of those progressive passes, I've seen a few clips of him. I've watched him live, but some of the clips that I've looked at retrospectively, some of the passes that he picks out, he just completely splits defences open, sometimes from quite a deep position. So he's definitely got all the right technical tools and the technical ability. And if Bowyer can overlook his slight criticisms of him in the past, then there's absolutely no reason why he may not be a player that Bowyer looks at in the future as a sort of either a project or to get him into the team almost now and look to work with him from there.
Yeah, he certainly looks a real talent, and if he doesn't move on from Charlton this summer, I'm sure it probably won't be long until we see him in the Championship, either with Charlton or with somebody else. As you say, it may be one that Bowyer looks at and potentially thinks he could take him on as a little bit of a project over the next year or two, or wait a little bit longer until he's progressed and matured by a year or two. So yeah, certainly one to look out for, Albie Morgan. So moving into the first of our sensible picks, and I'm up first with my sensible pick, and I have gone for 25-year-old. Although I think actually he celebrated his 26th birthday yesterday, but we'll go with 25. Centre midfielder Lewis Wing, who featured this season for Rotherham on loan from Middlesbrough. He's a player that kind of came out of nowhere a little bit about 4 or 5 years ago, where he signed for Middlesbrough from a non-league football. And it always seems to have been the case that he always seems to perform and score against Blues. I don't know whether that's just a bit of kind of recency bias, but he definitely scored against us in the home game, I believe, this year. It seems to be that he scored against us a couple of times before and always seems to have pretty big games whenever we face Middlesbrough. But he's a real energetic midfielder who's got a fantastic eye for goal. And also kind of, he's got that little bit of X factor about him. He just makes things happen and often out of nothing. And I think back to the final game of the season where Rotherham, needing a win, and he comes up with an absolute wonder strike against Cardiff to drag them back into the game. And obviously they missed out on staying up in the end. But, a real fantastic goal, really good technique. And as we said, we're looking for somebody that can add goals from the midfield. And I certainly think that he would be somebody that could definitely offer that. He's got a year left on his contract actually at Middlesbrough, but is seemingly completely out of favour there. Although he featured a little bit early on last season under Neil Warnock, and then went out on loan to Rotherham, I think, in January. But it does really feel like he's probably surplus to requirements there. So whether or not a fairly cheap deal can be struck, or in a similar vein to the Ryan Woods deal, where actually the two clubs could come to some sort of agreement over the final year of his contract and make it a free transfer, who knows. I would certainly imagine that there'd be some other interested parties in him as well. Given his exploits, and he's one of those players that probably isn't the most consistent, but he's remembered because of what he does in certain games, in similar fashion to someone like Adam Reach, who, as I say, is probably not consistent in his performance levels, but you kind of remember him or remember the name because of those spectacular goals that they score and those real wonder games that they have. He's played on either side of the midfield, right or left. He's played in the midfield 2 and he's played in the midfield 3, so he would certainly offer some good cover across those midfield positions, and he's got some real good championship experience now at 26 years old. And actually he does both sides of the game fairly well. You look at his defensive metrics there compared to the average championship midfielder, and they're all above average. And then both in his attacking and creative metrics as well, they're all almost all above average. You'd say then, looking at the possession side of it, that he's probably not as good in possession, which makes him possibly similar to somebody like Gary Gardner in the squad, albeit he probably offers a little bit more going forward. So yeah, I think he's probably he's an intriguing option for Championship clubs, and certainly one that if he was available, you'd like to think the Blues might be potentially interested in him.
Yeah, it was a weird one with Wing, because I remember him playing for Middlesbrough earlier on in this season, and then it seems like out of nowhere I was just watching Rotherham maybe on a Sunday morning, and he just appeared for Rotherham, and I had no idea that he'd gone there, because it almost felt like he was quite comfortable in the Middlesbrough setup, and it felt to me like he was doing quite well. And then out of nowhere I just saw that he was loaned to Rotherham, and I had to check that it was the same one, because I was quite shocked. And it may also, as you said before, I may have just sort of seen him score a couple of those wonder goals, and because they do sort of stick by you, you just get that sort of impression about a player almost from the off. But I think Reach is probably a good example, really. Again, every time you see Reach pop up, it's always with a 30-yard screamer out of absolutely nowhere, and Winger has his own sort of highlight reel of great goals, to be honest. So he can absolutely bring something to that Blues midfield.
Yeah, no, definitely. So we'll turn the page over, and Luke, it's your sensible pick for a centre midfielder.
And this is Carlisle United's Callum Guy, a 24-year-old. He's played in central midfield and slightly further behind as a defensive midfielder. He came through Derby's academy, where he was born in Nottingham. He spent 13 years at Derby through the youth level, through to the seniors, but he never quite made an appearance for Derby, and he never managed to break into their team. He had some stints at Port Vale, Bradford, Blackpool, before eventually going to Carlisle, where he's eventually settled there and produced quite a memorable season this year. So this has been his best personal season to date. He played 47 times this season in all competitions, and I believe Carlisle United finished 10th. The sort of player that he is, he's very much a box-to-box player. You can't really pigeonhole him as a defensive midfielder in the same way that you probably couldn't pigeonhole him as an attacking midfielder. He's just one of those players that are just good at generally everything, really, and he operates between both boxes. Very energetic. He likes to get up and down. There was a couple of great stats that picked out that highlighted what he does both ends of the spectrum, really, in the fact that only Warsaw's Liam Kinsella has won more tackles in League Two than Callum Guy. But at the same time, he's also notched up 14 assists this season, which again, wow. Even without seeing anything else, that all automatically sort of tells you what sort of player he is. That he likes to stick his foot in and he likes to help out the team defensively, but then he likes to bomb on and he likes to help at the other end of the pitch as well. The main criticism really is that obviously he's doing it at League Two level. And when you look at him compared to the average League Two central midfielder, obviously he stands out sort of quite noticeably in relation to his creativity, his defensive plays. A few of the possession metrics are a bit below average for a League Two central midfielder, but then the forward passes that he's playing does stand out. The passes into the final third and the progressive passes to get his team up the pitch. But at the same time, he's making those interceptions and standing out for it, having lots of successful defensive actions. So without you sitting there and watching Callum Guy, he does sort of paint a picture just from the stats, really, that he does operate at both ends of the pitch, and that's just the sort of player he is. Whether he could step up to the Championship, some people may criticise and say that they would like to see him do it at League One level first. Or perhaps doing a team in League Two challenging for the promotion sort of spots, potentially a higher calibre than what he's playing at already. But I suppose that's part of the fun, really, that myself and Ben are doing, just picking out players that we like to look at and think that, as a cheap option, as someone that could do a job. It's just a player that I quite like. When I have seen him, that's the sort of player that he is. And some may say again that he's quite similar to a Gary Gardner type, in the manner that he does get box to box and that he does sort of do everything to a decent standard rather than standing out as an absolute wizard in one department. But of course, those 14 assists at any level really make you sort of sit up and notice that he's the sort of player that has that bit of creativity to go with the defensive steel and the graft. So that I think if we were to be looking for a sort of player that has that all-round game and to bring something to our midfield, then whether he could make the step up remains to be questioned. But he's the sort of player that for a relatively cheap price, he could plug the gap. And at the age of 24, there's still a number of years where he could sort of develop into something further.
Yeah, he's not really a player that I know too much about at all, and I think that's probably the beauty of doing this, really, isn't it? That we come across some players that you probably wouldn't have heard that much about or seen much about before, and we're kind of bringing them to light a little bit, which is great fun. And as you say, just looking at those possession metrics there, it very much looks like he's quite brave on the ball. So he's looking to make those forward passes. He's looking to put balls into dangerous areas. Albeit they're not always coming off, but you think sometimes, that bravery is sometimes more difficult than executing the skill. An interesting one there, and as you say, would be a relatively cheap option from League Two there.
I completely agree with that. What you're saying there. I think that some midfielders, with absolute all due respect, they'll play at League Two and they'll be quite comfortable in the fact that they'll know that that's their level. or they may sort of have ambitions to play at maybe a level above. But Callum Guy, as you say, from the metrics there, when he does get the ball, he is having those ideas and he is trying to do something different with it. And it is interesting in relation to Callum Guy that he was voted as Carlisle's Player of the Year, but in a sort of fan poll of all the players in League Two, he was actually voted by the League Two fans in a poll as their favourite player in the league as well. So he's obviously going to against other teams, and he's standing out in that respect as well. So he's just a player that I generally like the look of, really.
Yeah, and that's always quite a big accolade for a player, isn't it? When you've got fans of other clubs that are singing your praises. So yeah, it doesn't come much sort of higher than that, does it at all? So we'll move over onto the next page and have a look at the first of our preferred options in the centre midfield role, and I've gone for a Championship youngster, Huddersfield Town's Lewis O'Brien, who's 22. He's a playmaking midfielder who absolutely loves to carry the ball forward. Really evident watching him is that he's a left footer, and I will admit that actually when we kind of put these options together, the left side of our centre midfield was really lacking in options. This was pre Riley McGree signing his loan extension. It was also pre Charlie Lakin and Caelan Boyd-Muntz signing their new deals with the club. So a left footer was something that I was really looking for, just to add a bit of balance to the centre midfield. But I still believe that Lewis O'Brien's got a really, really bright future ahead of him. I mean, the fact that he's already made over 100 appearances, senior appearances, for a 22-year-old is mad, really, including a pretty productive loan spell at Bradford a couple of years ago. So I mean, he's already got really great Championship experience. He'd have fantastic resale value, and we keep banging on about this resale value, and people are probably a little bit bored of us talking about it, but it's something that Blues haven't really done very well in their recruitment over the last couple of years, in terms of we've signed decent players and then given them contracts whereby we're then probably letting them leave on a free or a minimum fee. There's a couple of exceptions to that in terms of obviously Jude Bellingham, and who is just a complete generational talent, is a real exception to the rule. But Che Adams would be another one that you'd look at and say we've developed him from a fairly minimal price and sold him on a good value. But I mean, other than that, there's been very few players that we've signed in the last 5 or 6 years that we've really kind of bought in at fairly low value and then sold on. And part of that is probably to do with our poor performances. So it's difficult for players to stand out in a poor team. I mean, again, looking at the metrics on the right hand side there, in terms of creativity, he would certainly add a lot of creativity to our midfield. And as I say, you look at the fact that he loves to dribble, and the dribbles per 90 there and the progressive runs per 90 are right up there with any Championship centre midfielder. And that's what he offers, that's what he brings to Huddersfield's midfield in terms of just driving that team forward, getting the team up the pitch. And then potentially just looking at some of the drawbacks to this, although he only has a year left on his contract, he would command a decent fee. He's probably one of Huddersfield's key components at the moment and key players. He'd possibly also see it as a potential sideways move. Blues and Huddersfield finished in fairly similar positions last season, so it's not like he'd be moving to a club that was challenging at the other end of the table, albeit we're hopeful that we will be in the next year or so. And I guess the other thing would be that he's got a fairly slight physique. He's only 5'8", and he's a little bit lightweight. So it's whether or not he would struggle in that regard. But having watched a little bit, and whenever we've played against him, and some of the highlights of the Championship when it's on, he doesn't look like he massively struggles from that at all. And actually, look, even his defensive metrics are, for a midfielder, that playmaking midfielder that likes to get forward, they're not too bad compared to the championship average. So he's a player that I like a lot, and I think he's got a really bright future ahead. I would not be surprised to see him playing in the Premier League in the next couple of years, but he would be a real preferred option for me in Blues midfield.
Yeah, I have to admit I've only seen him a few times, but I've been very impressed with him. He looks the sort of player that, where the Huddersfield go now, do they, if he isn't sort of in any hurry to sign a new deal, then do they try and cash in on him? I'm sure the player himself, although he's 22, he may have half an eye upwards in the table and looking at a team that may sort of potentially be doing a bit better than Huddersfield, depending on the aims and the ambition of the player. But the problem is, of course, with Corberán there, I'm sure he's a player that he will want in there in order to help his style all gel together. And I'm sure that Corberán wouldn't want to lose a player like Lewis O'Brien. But of course, with that year left on his deal, then at some point they will be looking at, you would have thought he was trying to get some money and recuperate some funds for him. It's just if the player has loftier ambitions than the Trillion Trophy Arena.
Yeah, no, quite. Or whatever it's going to be called next season. Probably change again. Okay, so turning the page for the final time in this episode. And Luke, it's your preferred option at centre midfield, and who have you gone for?
Yeah, so I've gone for George Grant of Lincoln. 26 years old, fits that profile that we were looking at. Very much, he's box to box in a sense, but he much prefers to be going forward with the ball. So much so that, as well as playing sort of centrally, he has played on the left of midfield because he does like to get forward quite a bit. So he attended he took a bit of an unconventional journey into football via the Nike Academy, which has been famed for producing some pretty decent players. But he eventually signed for Nottingham Forest. Had some loan spells at Mansfield, Luton, and Notts County. And then he signed for Lincoln in 2019. I believe he spent 2 years there now, and he's just had his most successful season there. Depending on what platform you check, each sort of platform seems to tell me a different thing in relation to his assists. Probably down to what they classify as an assist, but I've seen figures such as 17 goals and 13 assists with some scouting platforms. But he's definitely got double figures in both, irrespective of the nitty gritty and how many he's quite got there. But he's definitely got double figures for both, and that sort of sums up his quality really. Some people may have seen him play recently in the League One playoffs, where Lincoln were unfortunately unsuccessful, but George Grant did shine across the fixtures really. He does like to, as I say, he does like to get out wide, which could be quite prudent in that if Bowyer did operate a diamond next season, because you're not limited to that narrow. Just sort of say, well, there's the narrow team, and that's what we're going to have for the rest of the game. With a player like George Grant, he can drift out to the wide, and it can give you that width sort of on the fly, so you aren't just sort of limited to a very narrow setup. One of his main attributes is the fact that he's a set-piece specialist. Some of the free kicks and corners that he's whipped in, something that we've possibly been missing from Blues for a while. And I did mention it earlier in the piece about Sanchez has taken a decent corner from the one side. But whenever I've seen George Grant, they are consistently brilliant set pieces. So that, of course, is always been in short supply down the Blues for quite a while. I'm sure Michael Appleton will be wanting to build a team around him next season. But the more you read recently in the media, there's talk about Championship clubs having bids accepted. And I believe that when he did sign a new deal at Lincoln, he did enter a clause into the contract whereby I believe that if a team above League One, so Championship or I assume higher, if a team above League One does meet a certain clause in his contract, then he can leave. And the noises coming out of Lincoln that they would shake his hand, wish him well, and they are sort of powerless to stop him leaving really. But he did get in the League One Team of the Year. I believe he did wear the captain's armband a few times as well, so it probably shows you how highly they did rate him at Lincoln. But yeah, he's just a brilliant player. Whenever I've seen him, he loves to bomb on, and again, leading on to the example I used earlier of when you look at Bowyer in his prime. If you ever watch any clips of the way Bowyer used to play, similar to a way that Lampard did famously when they are sort of central midfielders. But the next thing you know, they're popping up in the box. Very good at one-on-ones. I've seen him bury plenty of keepers on that one-on-one situation. He does like to just pick up the ball just outside the area and test the keepers from a decent range. You look at the progressive passes there and the rest of the metrics against average League One central midfielders. The main things that are standing out almost straight away is his attacking and his creativity. Likes to take shots there, so as I say, likes to get his shots off and test the keeper with a decent amount of accuracy. He has produced a decent XG per 90 there, which suggests that he does get into those positions to create the chances for himself, and he does like to dribble. But the key passes there, the key passes per 90 and the accuracy that he's putting the ball into the penalty area just shows that that as well as being a goal scorer, he does like to set other people up, and he does like to attempt to put the ball into the box for other players, really. And I guess that is reflected in the amount of goals and assists that he's got this season, and just how good he is and how versatile he is. He's played in the 3-5-2 and the 3 at the back formations, also in a 4-5-1 and a 4-3-3 and a couple of other setups. But he's just the ultimate versatile midfielder, really. He can sort of do it a bit more defensively and a bit further back, or he can, as I say, he can drift down the wing and play through the centre. And he is a real talent. I mean, the fact that he's 26, I imagine in his next move, somebody's going to get even, who knows, he could get even better and produce an even better output. But I think if he doesn't end up at a championship club this summer, which I imagine he will, then it's only a matter of time before he's making a step up, really.
Yeah, I think George Grant is a really exciting player, and I would bet a fair amount of money that he will be a championship player next season, not least because of this clause that's in his contract, which, without knowing obviously any of the details about it, the way that I saw it written in a report, in a newspaper report, was that it was a fee that all, if not most, championship clubs would be able to meet quite comfortably, suggesting to me that it's probably less than or around the £1 million mark, which I think for somebody that's produced that sort of output in League One, not just last season but the season before, I think championship clubs would be remiss not to go in for him, to be honest. As you say, he's got great versatility. He started out as a wide player, I believe, at Forest, and I remember him being on loan at Mansfield and playing out wide as well, but has since come probably a little bit more central, and again at times during the season at Lincoln he's dropped a little bit deeper into that midfield and played alongside Liam Bridcut. But the fact that he's still got that kind of winger in him, I guess, and attacking mindset means that he does love to get forward, and as you say, if he was to play in one of those wider midfield roles in a diamond, he would offer something different by drifting out wide as well. And I think that's probably what you want, because as you say, it's all very well having playing a diamond, for instance, but you kind of don't want to become too predictable in that, and having somebody that can make different types of runs I think is really important. So I'd be really excited about George Grant, and as I say, I would put a lot of money on him being a championship player next season for someone.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and again, the versatility that you mentioned there. I think that he did play out wide for quite a while, but when he was at Notts County, I believe he was a number 10, just sort of playing behind a striker or two strikers. And it was said about him when he was younger playing for Notts County that he just sort of showed it in flashes. So he could go a short while without really showing anything, and then he'd just show a flash of brilliance, which led to, of course, clubs further up the chain taking the gamble on him. And I suppose it's a credit to Lincoln and Appleton, really, that they have sort of taken him from that player who's played out wide or he's shown flashes of brilliance as a number 10, and they've turned him into an all-round sort of roaming, brilliant midfielder who can do everything, really. So again, that's probably a credit to Lincoln and Appleton, really. And it's almost a shame when you think that there may be a clause that sees the League One club potentially not remunerate as much money as they possibly would have. But of course, you could argue that Grant didn't need to sign the contract in the first place. He could have left for much less than I'm sure that they will eventually get. So I can see both sides of the argument, really. But it's interesting that it does sort of set him up for a championship club to come in there, and it'll be interesting to see where he sees himself playing, really. Does he want to play at a team that sort of fits his ability and sort of may look to build around him, or does he see himself looking to get a move to a club with potentially loftier ambitions, but potentially a club that won't necessarily build their play around him, that he may have to sort of fight his way into the team and may not start every game. So it'll be interesting to see what the player opts for. And of course, the rumours that a number of Championship clubs are looking at him, you'd hope all day long that Birmingham City are one of them. And I'd be absolutely delighted if we were, because at 26 years old, with the outputs that he's giving, just in the league below us, really, it almost feels like a no-brainer, really, and it almost feels like a deal that nothing's guaranteed in football, but you're almost guaranteed to, at the very least, get your money back when you eventually look to move him on. And anything above what this clause suggests that you may have to pay for him, anything above that is going to be looking at profit. So even if you're not looking to build around him and keep him for a number of years, even the option of reselling him further down the line, it's all there, really. And I think if I were a Championship club, I'd definitely be looking at him.
Yeah, my final thought on this one, and anyone that knows me knows that I absolutely hate this phrase, but he is a player that I think we should be all over, given what we've spoken about and given the kind of clause in his contract. So I think probably the most logical option, and I wouldn't be massively surprised to see him end up here, is probably back to Nottingham Forest, if I'm honest, which I know would please a lot of Forest fans, and not least Mr. Liam Henshaw, who I'm sure would be really glad to see him back at the club. But as I said, really not surprised if he ends up in the Championship next season with somebody.
And of course, he already knows Brennan Johnson from his time at Lincoln, so he has already got that. It almost feels tailor-made that he's going to go back there and where it all sort of started after the Nike Academy, but almost where it all started, and look to sort of make a name for himself there. So if he does, then I'm sure that Notts Forest will have a hell of a player on their hands, but it'll be interesting to see where he goes.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll close the book for the final time in this episode. We've run through the midfield options that are available to Lee Bowyer at this particular time. We've picked out a couple of key areas that we think could potentially do with some strengthening, when goal-scoring threat from central midfield. In the next episode and the final episode in Bowyer's Black Book, we will take a look at the forward options, including strikers, and we've kind of cheated a little bit to even it out, and we've included the attacking midfielders in that episode as well. So that will be coming to you very shortly. But that's all we've got time for on this one. So Luke, thank you very much again for joining me and talking through the options. It's been really good fun, and I look forward to the next episode.
A pleasure as always, mate.
Thanks for watching or listening, and we'll see you next time.